Hi, everyone. I'm Hayana Verissimo. I'm a staff product designer here at GitLab and currently acting product design manager for the CI/CD UX team. And this video is part of a series that looks into the staff and the product design manager roles and responsibilities. Today, we have here Marcel, and we're going to talk about um, how the staff and the product design manager roles differ from each other and from other roles as well in the UX department. Talk a little bit about transition between from IC to leadership and career development at GitLab. So Marcel, please introduce yourself. Let's get started.
For sure, thank you. My name is Marcel van Remmerden. I'm the product design manager for all of Create. I've been in this position for about 1 year now. Previously, I was a senior product designer in the editor team, which also belongs to Create. And yeah, this is now almost the end of my second year at GitLab. So pretty long time already in GitLab terms, but still rather fresh.
Yeah, that's in GitLab years. That's probably like 7 years, for regular companies. Um, can you tell me a little bit about like what your background in design is? So this is, if I understood correctly, this is your first experience in management and leadership. If that's not the case, can you tell us a bit about what you did and where you came from before GitLab?
For sure. I want to really go back to the beginning so that it's easier to understand my path. I studied communications with a very technical background. During that time, I already had the chance in some smaller startups to really dive into design, to really start some initiatives. And I studied in the Netherlands, where people are very straightforward, very driven, and people sometimes are just doing things. And I just took over this approach of just going in and trying to take on things, even if they sometimes feel a bit scary. And so during my time when I studied, I already started freelancing. I set up my own tiny small design agency where I helped out some smaller clients, and over time grew larger and larger, so that after I finished my studies, I was still freelancing then for bigger clients like eBay. But I also noticed that I wanted to see how larger companies, how larger industries operate. I joined IBM at a time where design really came into play. And I was one of the founding members of the IBM design studio in Hamburg. And we were all consultants there. So I went to huge companies, mostly in Germany, but everywhere in Europe, to help them understand how to set up new projects in a design-driven way, how to get current projects that are in some kind of a bad state into a good state again. And I worked together with a lot of different kinds of team members. And that was an amazing learning experience for me. But what I also noticed was for me that it didn't move as quick and as flexible as I wanted it to be. So back then I decided I wanted a change. I joined a small virtual reality startup in a small town of Germany. They grew from 5 to 55 engineers within 1 year. They still had the one design intern they had at the beginning. So they just grew the engineering department without the design department. And back then I helped them go from this one design intern to 8 designers, helped them set up an entire new process for how to onboard new clients, because they were part product development, part consulting, and also help them figure out how we can bring design more into the virtual reality projects, where it was very much depending more on the engineer and the project manager, how they wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because in virtual reality, not much was already known at that time.
Awesome. And I hear a lot of this experiences of helping setting up the design processes and the team and helping bridge the gap. Let's put it like that. How do you think this experience helped you or shaped you towards, developing skills um, that helped you get to the design management path?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think especially when you look at my consulting experience, this is where it really came in very handily, because when you're a consultant, you have to jump into a new project basically every 1 to 3 months. And you constantly have to understand how these teams work, how they fit together. You see the advantages, you also see the disadvantages. And you can basically set up your own process, try out how it feels for 1 to 3 months, and then go to the next project and take your learnings with you and iterate and adapt it for the next time again.
Hmm. So it also sounds a lot like what we do here at GitLab, right? This constant iteration and yeah, I would say the self-improvement. But I'd say my experience as well in consultancy is that you don't get to see that project. Um, I would say not grow, but there's a deadline, right? There's a time to end. So how would you say that this iteration differs from uh, the iteration that we do here at GitLab in terms of yeah, design and leadership?
Yeah, especially from viewing it as a designer, it was sometimes very tough because you were implementing designs, you were implementing ideas, you were coming up with new kinds of information architecture, and the team started implementing it. But that's when you got pulled out of the project because you had to go to the next one. And that was sometimes very frustrating. And one of the biggest points why I wanted to leave IBM back in that time, because I really needed to still understand, if I implement something, how can I measure constantly and like on a long-term basis how much that helps the team, helps the product, helps the company. And so, yeah, there's absolutely more nuances to it.
Yeah, I think designers, we all crave, I'm generalizing, but my experience with people is that we all crave seeing the results, right? Being able to iterate and improve on our deliverables. So I understand that. So going back a little bit about your career here at GitLab, um, I'm interested in knowing what has your self-development, your path being at GitLab. So you talked a little bit about the transition. So can you extend a bit there, but also tell me what do you do today as a product design manager, and how is that different from your past experience as a senior product designer?
For sure. I want to start at the beginning when I joined GitLab. We were 10, 12, 13 designers roughly. And back when I joined, it was me and Pedro in Create. We had Jarek also join us after a couple of weeks. And this was the first time where Create really got split up from a design perspective into multiple smaller groups. And this was very interesting because I was able to learn under Pedro how the GitLab structure works, about the GitLab values. I was more taking on smaller, tiny issues that I could iteratively work on without yet having to depend on myself as much. But then when I stepped into the editor team and we got split up, that was really where I had to work way closer with Kai, my PM, directly, and where it was more just me, him, and the rest of the team, and where more of the design work really just depended on me. That went on for about a couple of months, almost an entire year. And we made some amazing changes in that time. We really started working on OKRs. We really started growing bigger and bigger in that time. And what we noticed especially was that with that growth, we also needed to look at how does our collaboration work. And shortly before I jumped into the newly open design manager position for Create, there were a couple of OKRs where that especially stood out, where we were all kind of like more working in our own groups, more isolated. And I wanted to pull us out of this rut and pull us out of working in these groups. And this is what I tried back then to achieve with the OKRs, and trying to step into that position already. So that when Shane announced that he was moving to the other team inside of GitLab, it was easier for me to directly jump in and directly see what have the other teams been working on. I had already set up connections to the other team members, and I had already also shown that I'm comfortable in this position.
And then how do you navigate the challenges of this transition? Right, because it sounds like it was a seamless transition, but I'm going through the same. Um, and I would like to understand if you faced any challenges, but also if you did, what were the challenges, and um, how did they influence, right, your success, but also your role as a product design manager?
Yeah, it was very interesting because when I previously worked together with all the amazing team members in Create, I now suddenly was their manager. And that's just a different kind of relation. That's just a different
Hmm.
kind of interaction you're having. And it was very interesting because I hadn't been in that position before, where you jumped from one position inside the team suddenly to another one. I had been leading design teams, but I came on fresh as a new manager. And so it was
Mm.
already established, the kind of interaction you're having. And so what I really tried to communicate to all the designers in my team was, I know how amazing you are. I know the great work you are doing. I don't want to interfere here. Tell me how I can support you. Tell me how I can help you. And this is what I both needed to also communicate to them, but
Hmm.
also what I needed to first understand myself. That took some time. I needed to understand how I wanted to play this role. But in the end, it really was very clear to me that if I want to be a manager, I need to be comfortable giving them this flexibility, this freedom of still doing the designs in their own way, even though they have a manager now that also has experience as GitLab designer.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point because coming from the IC, especially coming from your becoming the manager of your own team, right? So your reports are now or your peers. That poses a challenge, but also so many opportunities, right, for understanding the growth of the team, but also understanding the product. Um, so I'm also curious to hear a bit what what changed in your day-to-day life, like what responsibilities um, differ from a product design manager and a senior product designer. What does your day look like, and also how did that impact your learning and your development? So many
Yeah,
questions. I'm too curious.
absolutely. And most often, my day really begins with notifications. I'm involved in many different efforts at the same time, and I have to find ways to keep up to date to them. I actually love our new feature of following users because that allows me to look at what have the different people that I've been working with been doing while I was asleep. Not to like track how much work have they done, but to really understand, is there anything where I need to chime in or that I need to understand when I talk about something we have been working on together with other people? Because so often it's us working on some initiatives and sometimes me acting as a spokesperson, but at least, even if it's not a spokesperson, at least being able to communicate the effort, communicate our current thinking around this to other people that are involved. And so this helps me a lot. I jump into a huge number of Google Docs from team meetings so that I can understand what have they been working on, that I'm aware, that I can also connect people with each other. A lot of my work is really just asking people, hey, have you already talked to that other person that also is working on something related? And to be able to do that, I need to be aware of what's happening across the entire create sector. To do that, I also have tons of meetings. I meet every product manager. I meet obviously every designer. I meet our technical writers. I meet the front end engineering manager for all of Create. Actually, she's the engineering manager, not only the front end engineering manager. And so there's a lot of discussion, communication, collaboration happening. There's almost no design work anymore. I still like to be involved as some kind of feedback board and to be able to give the designers that I'm working with direct feedback, asking them also sometimes tougher questions. But I usually don't go into any issues anymore and just design from
Mhm.
scratch something. That's definitely a change for me.
And how do you get, I mean, I understand that there's a lot of outlets, right? There's a lot of opportunities to get knowledge and to get this understanding of what's going on in Create. Um, but since you're no longer designing, right? So you're not on the day to day, not hands on prototyping and working on issues. Um, how do you get the context, for example, of what the so many different categories in Create are looking like, or what the vision is, etc., in terms of alignment with the team? Because I understand that there's a lot of conversations, right, with people, and being in a way the filter to all this, the ideas and the direction for Create. But how do you stay on track about the overarching uh, vision, let's say, for your stage group, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Um, and there's a number of ways. Each team has a Slack channel. Just
Mm.
staying subscribed to that Slack channel and monitoring it every morning to see what did people talk about yesterday gives you a first good overview over what's currently going on in the daily life in that team. There's the kickoff videos that you can watch to look at what has been scheduled. But each team also talks about what are they planning on working in separate issues. Most often, that's also something that comes up in my discussions with the PM, where we're talking about, hey, what's your plan for the next 1, 2, 3 milestones?
Mm-hmm.
And then also asking, is that already reflected in the category direction page? I also use these quite a lot to make sure I'm on the same board as the product manager and as the designer to understand where is the entire category moving towards to and what problems are we solving, and is that maybe a problem that's related to another team? Do we need to pull them in already? Are we that far away from it? And so there's really a ton of ways, and you kind of have to be aware of all of them and have to jump into them. But it's not that you have to read every single notification. That would be too much. You just have to know that you poke around whenever you have a bit of free time and then come to the right places. And afterwards, it's really more about the meetings and the one-on-ones with the product manager and the designers.
So staying connected and staying on top of the high level conversation is it's a really uh, important, right, aspect of your role. And I hear a lot of designers talking about cross stage collaboration, right? So going a bit uh, over the bubble of your own stage group. How, as a product design manager, can you facilitate or be involved in this type of conversations? Is this something that is part of your scope of responsibilities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, and I would actually say it's one of my highest priorities because
Mm.
if we as product design managers who are actually looking across the entire stage and also communicating with the other product design managers from other stages, if we don't do that, then how can we expect it from our own designers? And so there's a lot of aspects that are very similar to just staying on track with your own team, how to do this. You have to be aware of what group conversations are going on. You have to watch kickoff videos. And so bring these topics up with your own designers. See if they have already talked with the other designers. Look at the UX showcases. All of this is really so important for staying on track and then constantly making the other people aware, like, this is an effort that's going on in this team. Are you aware of this? And if not, give them a short introduction, tell them who to reach out to, and make sure you have that knowledge so that you can spread it around further.
Yeah, being the facilitator, right, for the growth in the conversation. It's very interesting. I think
Exactly.
it's something that, as individual contributors, that we try to do that also proactively, right, as designers. But I agree, having the manager being aware or being able to help us and guide us in certain directions is definitely a positive, let's say. Yeah. We're almost at
And
the end of our
as
conversation. So, but I still want to cover a couple of topics. I'm curious to understand, not to understand, but we know that leadership development, like self development, is not about your title, right? You can exercise leadership. You can be an expert or a reference inside a GitLab without transitioning to a different role or without a promotion. That's clear. Um, but I'd like to hear from you. You talk about OKRs, right? And I remember the UI polish, all these high level opportunities, high level as in global opportunities that happen to you, that you are involved as an individual contributor. Um, but knowing that leadership doesn't come only with the title, what internal and external learning developments did you seek? What opportunities did you find uh, when you were a senior product designer that helped influence your career, that helped you uh, get to where you are today?
External material, that's a very interesting question. Um, I'm I'm trying to stay on top of what's happening inside the design scene, mainly via Twitter, and using that as kind of like a board to jump out into different other topics. I have set up my Twitter timeline in a way that I'm following a lot of product and design leaders, so that whenever they talk about something, I kind of see it. I can jump out to different topics. I can jump out to different channels. Oftentimes there are certain blogs. So if you want to see how I do that, look at my Twitter follows, look at what I'm talking about on Twitter, look at what kind of communications I'm retweeting. This is how I try to understand how the industry is evolving. Next to that, one of the areas where I have spent a lot of my own time and resources into is getting better in coding, getting better in development, not to code myself, but to have better conversations with engineers, to be able to prototype more easily, and also to be able to understand better what any implications of my designs actually would be. And that's where I did a ton of courses. That's where I had a lot of discussions, a lot of times where I followed people who are talking, for example, around no code development. And so this is a topic that back then I was very passionate about.
Nice. And for the future, are there any areas that you would like to further develop? Anything that is interesting for you and that you still want to learn as a product design manager?
Oh, absolutely. So many. I think our current initiative around really focusing on accessibility is amazing. That's something where I have some knowledge, but definitely not enough. And I think there can almost never be enough knowledge about accessibility, because the people who we care for around accessibility are really the ones that are already the most vulnerable. And caring more for these users is going to be making an amazing impact on their lives. I would love to become better in supporting our tech writers. I know that especially working in GitLab as a designer is tough. As a tech writer, it might even be more tough. It's a very interesting combination, and I don't yet know enough myself about how to be a good tech writer that I can really talk deeply with them. Most of my topics, in my understanding, really only scratch the surface. And so I want to learn more about this area so that I can collaborate with them better. But then also looking at larger structures. Like, how do we set up an entire design team that's not only 8 people as I did in my previous company, but that's like 50, 100, 200. What are the different models for this? What kind of advantages, disadvantages does that lead to? That's something I would love to learn and understand better.
That's awesome. And do you see any, like, giving how our company organization is structured today? Um, what opportunities did you see? Do you see there are in place today that can empower you to pursue, yeah, learning more about tech writing, being able to grow the design team? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. That's really where our transparency and our openness is so amazing, because in another company, I might have to go to another building to meet the tech writers. Here, when, for example, Amy just joined our Create team very recently, I took that as a chance to set up a bi-weekly one-on-one with her to not only make sure she's onboarding into the Create team well, but also to use as time for me to better understand how does she approach her work, how does she look at her work, and how can I be a better support and better partner for her. And I can look into the Slack channel of their team. I can look into the meeting notes of these teams. All of this really puts me into a position where it's so easy for me to understand and learn from them.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this organization. We get access to everything and everyone can contribute. You just have to choose where do you want to focus your impact, right? Where you're the most useful. That's awesome. Oh, we're at time, but I would like to thank you, Marcel. I really it was really nice and getting to know you a little bit better and talking about leadership and your career. So thanks for making the time to have this conversation with me today.
Thank you for setting this up. I think this is really valuable and helpful.
Awesome.